They laughed when he touched the rich kid's piano. But when his fingers pressed the keys, the room went silent. Elijah Brooks didn't speak much, not because he was shy. He just didn't see the point in talking when nobody ever really listened. He lived on Baton Rouge's west side, near Florida Boulevard, in a tiny two-bedroom apartment with walls so thin he knew his neighbors better than he wanted to. His mum, Charlene, worked double shifts at the local clinic. His older brother, Isaiah, ran with a crowd Elijah didn't trust, but Elijah had music, not a fancy piano or high-tech gear, just a broken-down keyboard at the rec center down the street. Half the keys didn't work, and the chords sparked if you moved it wrong. But to Elijah, it was enough. Every afternoon after school he'd race there, fingers hungry to play, no sheet music, no lessons, just the melodies in his head and heart. He played what he felt, joy, anger, even silence. Nobody had taught him. Some things don't need teaching, they just are. At school, Elijah stayed quiet. He wasn't a troublemaker, but he wasn't a star either. Teachers never noticed how he tapped rhythms during math, or how his eyes brightened when the school anthem played. Most kids ignored him, except when they needed answers or someone to tease. His only escape, Miss Delacroix, his music teacher. She was the only adult who really saw him. She'd catch him humming at lunch, pull him aside after class, and ask about chords, scales, how to tell stories with his hands instead of words. "You hear the world differently, Elijah," she once told him after he played a made-up lullaby for an assignment. "Don't ever lose that." He didn't plan to. Then, one Thursday before spring break, the school announced a special event, a community arts exchange with Bayside Prep, a fancy private school across town. Most kids groaned. Elijah sat up straighter. Bayside Prep, big lawns, uniforms, a cafeteria that served sushi. Rumors said they had a baby grand piano in every music room. Elijah had never touched a real piano before. He'd seen one once at a downtown concert hall when his class got free symphony tickets. It gleamed under the stage lights like something from a dream. He barely heard the music that night. He was too busy watching the pianist's hands. Now he might see one up close, maybe even play one if no one was looking. The night before the trip, Charlene ironed his best shirt, even though it had a stain near the cuff. "Behave," she said, not looking up. "Don't embarrass me in front of those people." "I won't." "Don't touch anything you're not supposed to." He nodded. He meant it, but music had a way of making him forget rules. Elijah had no idea how one mistake, or maybe one moment of courage, was about to change everything. The bus ride to Bayside Prep took 30 minutes, but stepping through those iron gates felt like entering another world. Perfectly trimmed hedges, fountains that actually worked, buildings that looked like museums. Kids in navy blazers stood in groups laughing like they'd never worried about tomorrow. Everything felt too perfect, too quiet. Even the sidewalks seemed like they cost more than his whole apartment. Elijah stepped off the bus with his classmates, fingers tight around his backpack strap. He didn't speak, just stared at the courtyard with its bronze statue in the center. Some old founder holding a scroll, his stone face frozen in a smug grin. Inside, the floors shone like mirrors. The halls smelled like lemon cleaner and new paper. No graffiti, no chipped tiles, no teachers shouting down the hallway, just quiet confidence. They passed framed student artwork, pieces displayed like they belonged in a museum. One even had a price tag, $200. Elijah's stomach twisted. He could draw too, but no one had ever offered to buy his sketches. They were herded into an auditorium where Bayside students sat in perfect rows. A silver-haired man welcomed them in a voice so smooth it sounded like a sermon. He talked about unity, creative expression, and how this was a celebration of talent from all backgrounds. Elijah scanned the room. Out of everyone there, he was one of maybe 5 black kids. Most of the Bayside students looked like they'd never missed a meal, never been told, "Not today." Never had to wait until Friday for new socks. A jazz ensemble performed, tight, polished, impressive. But something about it made Elijah's chest ache. Not because he wasn't good enough, because he knew he was, but no one here would believe that unless he showed them. They split into workshops. Elijah got assigned to songwriting in room 208. He walked silently as kids around him joked about cafeteria food and whose parents drove Teslas. Then he saw it. The music room. Not like the one back at his school. This one had floor-to-ceiling windows, soundproof walls, and instruments lined up like soldiers, guitars, violins, a cello in the corner. But none of that mattered, because there, in the center, stood a but glossy black Steinway grand piano. Bigger than anything he'd ever touched. The lid was open, the keys gleamed like polished bone. The teacher wasn't here yet. Most kids took seats, bored, not Elijah. He stood by the wall, staring at the piano like it was daring him. Then a voice cut through the air. "Don't even think about it." He turned, a tall, blonde boy in a monogrammed blazer, PJW, stitched, on the chest, smirked at him, flanked by two friends who looked like they practiced scowling in the mirror. "That's my dad's donation," the boy added. "You got anything like that in your neighborhood?" Elijah blinked. Was this kid serious? "I wasn't going to break it." "You sure?" The boy's grin widened. "Careful, those keys aren't made for dirty fingers." The words hit like a slap. The room got quieter. A few students turned to watch. Elijah's ears burned, but he didn't move. His hands stayed at his sides. The piano suddenly felt miles away, like it had slipped into another world. Part of him wanted to walk out. Part of him wanted to speak, but he didn't trust his voice not to shake. Then, someone behind him laughed. And something inside Elijah snapped. He didn't remember deciding. 1 second, he was standing there, heart pounding. The next, he was walking toward the piano. The blonde boy's smirk faltered. His friends exchanged glances like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Elijah didn't hesitate. He pulled out the bench and sat down slowly like he had all the time in the world. His palms were sweaty, his throat was dry, but his fingers? Steady. The room held its breath. The teacher still wasn't here. Maybe that was luck. Maybe it was fate. Elijah lifted his hands over the keys and paused. Because this wasn't the broken keyboard from the rec center. This was real. This was weight. This was sound that filled a room, not because it was loud, but because it mattered. He could feel every eye on his back. He could hear the boy's voice in his head. Dirty fingers. Like his skin had somehow tainted the air. He took one last breath and pressed the first key. A double C, clean, clear. It rang out like it had been waiting for him. Then came an E, then a G. He built the chord by feel. No one had to teach him this. Music was the only thing that ever made sense without needing words. His left hand followed, walking bass notes, soft at first, then stronger. Then his right hand returned, weaving a melody over the rhythm. Something familiar, something unfinished. It was the melody he played when no one was listening. The one he'd never named, too private, too his. A song that didn't need words to say everything he couldn't. The room began to change. Conversations died. Chairs squeaked as people leaned in. The boys behind Preston, no longer smirking, now just staring. Preston's jaw clenched. But Elijah didn't see him anymore. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for the nights spent alone in his room, listening to the city hum outside his window. For the Sundays when his mum swayed to gospel at church, face finally soft, eyes closed. For the version of himself no one had ever let speak. The music grew louder, his hands moving faster. Sure, sharp, not perfect. A missed note here, a fumbled chord there. But it didn't matter. It was real. Alive. The kind of playing that didn't ask permission. When he stopped, the silence didn't break right away. That heavy pause after a gut punch. Then, a girl in the back whispered. "Whoa!" One clap, then a few more. Preston stood, frozen, fists tight at his sides. "That wasn't bad," one of his friends muttered, but Elijah heard what hid under those words. Respect. The door creaked open. The teacher walked in, clipboard in hand. She froze mid-step, eyes darting from Elijah to the stunned class. "Did I miss something?" A kid near the front nodded slowly. "Yeah, you did." Elijah stood, pushing the bench back into place. He didn't speak. For once, the silence didn't choke him. It belonged to him. But just as he thought it was over, he turned and found something waiting in the hallway he never expected. Elijah stepped into the hall, heart still pounding, proud, scared. He couldn't tell. Then he saw them. A crowd had gathered outside the music room. Students from other workshops, teachers, drawn by the sound. Some curious, some shocked, a few impressed. But one face stood out, Miss Delacroix, hand over her mouth, not in surprise, but something warmer. Her eyes glistened in a way that made Elijah look down. She moved toward him. "You really played that?" Soft, reverent, he nodded. "That was yours, that music?" Another nod. Naming it felt too dangerous. She glanced past him into the room, then back. "Elijah, that wasn't just good, that was rememberable." He swallowed. He hadn't played to be remembered, just to see what the keys felt like when touched without fear. A new voice cut in, a tall woman in a grey blazer. "I'm Mrs. Caldwell," she said, bending to his level. "I run the advanced music program, heard you from down the hall." Elijah's voice stuck in his throat. She smiled. "Ever had lessons?" Head shake. "Where'd you learn to play like that?" "Just practiced," he managed. "Rec center, my brother's headphones." Her smile deepened. "You've got something special. That ear, that feel, you can't teach that. You just let it grow." Behind her, Preston slunk out of the room, blazer wrinkled from leaning too long against the wall. His eyes locked onto Elijah's. No words, no smirk, just something unreadable. Miss Delacroix stepped closer. "Elijah, how do you feel about playing at the final performance today?" His head snapped up. "Me?" "They always pick one guest student to perform," she said. "And you should." He glanced at Mrs. Caldwell, back to Miss Delacroix. Nerves hit him like a second wave. Playing in class was one thing, the auditorium. "I don't know," he mumbled. Miss Delacroix touched his shoulder. "You don't have to, but you'll regret it if you don't." Deep down, he knew she was right. Elijah nodded slowly. "Okay." The teachers drifted away, the hallway emptying, the world moving on as if nothing had happened. But something had. He followed Miss Delacroix toward the performance hall, his steps heavy, the corridor stretching impossibly long. Inside him something new hummed, not quite confidence, but certainty. Like when a song plays and you already know the next note, even if you've never heard it before. Preston lingered near the doorway. "Elijah." He turned. Preston looked like he wanted to say something, maybe take back his words, maybe pretend none of it happened. Instead, he just gave the smallest shrug and walked away. But as Elijah stepped into the auditorium later that day, he had no idea who else was watching from the shadows, or how far his music would reach beyond those walls. The auditorium glowed brighter than Elijah remembered. Behind the curtain, his heart hammered. The stage floor gleamed under the lights, rows of seats stretched out, half filled with students munching snacks, scrolling phones, whispering. Teachers stood near the back, murmuring. To everyone else, this was just another school event. To Elijah, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. His wrinkled shirt clung to his back, sweat darkening the collar. His fingers trembled, not from fear of playing, but from the weight of so many eyes. Of being seen. Miss Delacroix appeared beside him. "They're going to love you." What if I mess up? You won't. She paused. And even if you do, they'll still feel it. That helped. A little. The announcer, a tall girl with glasses and a polished voice, stepped forward. We'd like to welcome a guest student from Martin Luther King Jr. Middle, Elijah Brooks, with an original piano piece. Polite applause. Elijah walked out. He didn't look at the crowd, just the piano, waiting center stage, glowing under the lights like it knew him now. He sat, took one breath, let his fingers find home, and played. This wasn't the same song as before. This one was slower, softer, like a secret whispered out loud. It started with an ache, the kind you can't name, lingering in the spaces between notes. Then it shifted, warming, growing bolder, like something learning to stand on its own. Every measure was a piece of him, nights alone in his room, his mother praying in the kitchen, thinking no one heard. The rec center keyboard, sparking but never giving up. The room stilled, phones lowered, even the teachers stopped whispering. And somewhere in the second half, the emotion caught up to him. His chest tightened, eyes burned, but his hands never faltered. When the last note faded, he lifted his fingers slowly, like letting go of something heavy. Silence. Then one clap. Another. Then the whole room rising in waves. Not a standing ovation, this wasn't a movie, but real, full applause. Students stood. A teacher wiped her eye. Even the announcer looked stunned. Elijah stood, bowed without thinking, then hurried off stage before the crowd could catch him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, breathing hard. That was incredible. He turned. Preston. Blazer buttoned now, hair neater, but the smirk gone. No friends flanking him this time. I didn't know you could do all that, he said. Elijah said nothing. Preston shifted. What I said earlier, I was out of line. Still, Elijah stayed quiet. I just didn't expect it, Preston admitted. Elijah met his eyes. You didn't have to. Preston nodded once. Yeah. No grand moment, no handshake, just two boys in a hallway too big for either of them. Miss Delacroix burst out, beaming. You did it. Elijah let out a breathless laugh. I think I did. She studied him. Let's talk later. There's someone you should meet. But what Elijah didn't know, someone in that crowd had already made a call, one that would open a door he never dreamed of walking through. By the time the bus pulled back into Martin Luther King Jr. Middle, the sky was streaked gold. Elijah sat near the back, forehead against the window, watching Baton Rouge roll by, fast food signs, gas stations, corner stores. Familiar, comfortable, but smaller now. He hadn't spoken much. A few classmates high-fived him. One asked how he learned to play like that. Jamar even joked, Bro, you made rich kids clap. That's magic. Elijah smiled, but inside, everything still buzzed. Not nerves, not fear. Something else, something he didn't have a name for yet. Miss Delacroix waited at the bus steps. Elijah. She pulled him aside. Mrs. Caldwell, the woman I introduced you to, she wants to see you again. Why? She runs a summer arts program, scholarship-based. Miss Delacroix's voice dropped. It's rare to find someone like you, untrained, but born with it. Elijah stared at his scuffed sneakers. I can't afford lessons. That's the point, she said gently. Everything's covered. You just show up and play. Elijah's throat tightened. Opportunities like this didn't come to kids like him. Not without strings. I told her I'd talk to your mum, Miss Delacroix added. That night, Charlene stood in their small kitchen, one hand gripping the glossy brochure, the other holding a half-burned grilled cheese. Her face gave nothing away, but her silence screamed. They're not trying to use him? She finally asked, voice tight. No, Mum, Miss Delacroix said from their rickety table. It's real. They've done this for kids across the state. Charlene scanned the paper again. Where's he staying? Dorms, supervised, Baton Rouge School for the Arts. Just a few weeks, home by summer's end. Elijah sat on the couch edge, backpack still on, fingers digging into the straps. His mother's eyes locked onto his. "You want this?" He didn't blink. "I think I do." She sighed deep, the kind that meant her thoughts were miles ahead of her words. "He's 12, she muttered. "Still a baby?" "I'll be careful," Elijah whispered. "You better." She gave Miss Delacroix a long look. "I'll think on it." For now, that was enough. A week later, the envelope arrived, crisp white with blue trim, his name typed center stage. Inside, the official offer. Elijah read it 3 times before handing it to his mum. She didn't speak, just nodded. Then passed it back without a word. He packed his things in a duffel too big for his frame. Miss Delacroix drove him to campus herself. On the way, she told him about other program kids, some who'd never touched an instrument before, others now at Juilliard, Berkeley. "But none of them," she said, glancing over, "sounded like you." The campus wasn't like Bayside, no fountains, no marble, just honest ware, paint-chipped windowsills, benches, smoothed by years of waiting students. He liked that. His first day, he played for 3 instructors. They didn't ask where he came from. They asked, "What key feels like home?" "In D minor," he said. They nodded like they understood. By week's end, he'd written 3 new pieces. By week 2, he was teaching a classmate how to write chord changes by feel, not math. One evening, his instructor sat beside him at the piano. "Know what I told my husband after hearing you play?" Elijah shook his head. That's what talent looks like when it's unafraid. But even with new keys under his fingers, even with doors swinging open, Elijah had one last thing to do before any of it felt real. October. Elijah walked back through Bayside Prep's doors. No school bus this time, no field trip forms, just him. Invited by Mrs. Coldwell to perform at the fall recital. A surprise solo act from the summer program's star. Proof of what raw talent could become. He'd grown a little taller, jeans fitting better, curls tamed, hands steady with quiet confidence. The auditorium hadn't changed, gleaming floors, blinding stage lights. But now it didn't loom over him. Front row, Miss Delacroix, eyes glistening with pride. Beside her, Charlene in her best blouse, gripping the seat like it might vanish. She'd been unsure about this. Don't know what folks like that want from kids like you. Elijah's answer had been simple. Just to hear. Now here she was, ready to listen. The MC's voice rang out. Tonight's final performer reminds us why music matters. Please welcome Elijah Brooks. He walked out, not slow, not fast, just sure. The Steinway waited. This time he didn't hesitate. The piece was new, something he'd written weeks ago, no title, just movement. It began low, careful, like counting steps in the dark, then climbed, measure by measure, into something warmer, bolder. Flourishes, yes, but nothing showy. Every note had purpose, every phrase honest as a heartbeat. Halfway through, he glanced up. Preston. 3 rows back, arms crossed, watching. They hadn't spoken since that hallway, but words weren't needed now. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was understood. When the last note hung in the air, Elijah held it just long enough for the room to forget to breathe. Then, release. This time, the applause wasn't polite. It was alive. Charlene stood, not clapping, just staring at her son like she was seeing him for the first time. Then, slowly, she smiled. After the show, they flocked to him. Teachers, parents, students. "Where'd you learn? What's next?" He answered quietly, still uneasy with eyes on him. But one moment stuck. A small boy, maybe 9, glasses crooked, tugged his sleeve. That made me want to try piano. Elijah crouched to his level. "You should, but I don't know how." "Doesn't matter, just start." The boy's grin said everything. Later, in the car, Charlene was quiet. "You okay?" Elijah asked. She nodded. "Just never thought I'd see something like that. Not with your name on it." He watched streetlights blur past. "Me neither. But maybe it was always there." She didn't reply, just reached across the console and squeezed his hand. That night, Elijah sat with a notebook in his lap, not writing music, just words. One line stood out. "You don't need an invitation to be allowed." The world hadn't given him permission to sit at that piano. He'd taken it, gently, honestly, fully. And in doing so, he'd reminded them, and himself, that talent doesn't care where you're from, what you wear, or how much your parents donated. It only cares that you listen when it calls. So if you're reading this, wondering if you're good enough, if you're allowed, here's your sign. You are. Now go do it.